The emergency lights painted the abandoned corridors in pulses of crimson, each flash revealing another scene of chaos as Captain Elias Drake led his team deeper into Outpost Helios. The research station hung silent in orbit around a distant gas giant, its once bustling halls now a tomb for secrets Elias wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. Life supports functioning at minimal capacity, Lieutenant Jace Kimura reported, his voice muffled by his helmet. Temperatures dropping by the hour. Whatever happened here, it was fast. Elias nodded, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Any signs of survivors? Negative, Captain, Specialist Amara Okafor replied, eyes fixed on her scanner. No conventional biosignatures detected. Just like the other sections we've swept. 3 hours into their search, they'd found plenty of evidence of the tragedy, overturned furniture, abandoned personal effects, traces of what might have been blood, but no bodies. The 47 scientists and support staff who'd manned Outpost Helios had vanished without explanation. Let's check the primary research lab, Elias ordered, gesturing toward the central hub of the station. Then we'll. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision made him freeze. His hand instinctively went to his sidearm. Did you see that? He whispered. His team stopped, weapons ready, but the shadowy corridor ahead remained still. See what, sir? Jace asked, scanning the darkness. Elias frowned. I thought I saw, never mind. Stay alert. The research lab's massive doors were sealed, emergency protocols engaged. It took Amara several minutes to bypass the security systems, each second amplifying the unease crawling up Elias's spine. When the doors finally slid open with a reluctant groan, they revealed a lab in disarray, shattered equipment, torn documentation, and the unmistakable signs of a desperate struggle. And in the center of it all, motionless beneath the stuttering lights, stood a woman. No, not a woman. At least, not human. Her skin was a deep, midnight blue that seemed to absorb the emergency lights rather than reflect them. Golden curls cascaded down her back, contrasting sharply with her alien complexion. When she turned toward them, Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. Her eyes were pools of liquid silver, pupilless and glowing with an inner light that pierced straight through him. Captain, Jace whispered, raising his weapon. Unknown entity at 12 o'clock. Elias raised a hand, signaling his team to hold position. Something about her kept him from giving the order to fire, a vulnerability in her posture, perhaps, or the unmistakable intelligence in those otherworldly eyes. Identify yourself, he commanded, voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. She studied him for a long moment, head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. When she finally spoke, her voice was melodic, with an accent he couldn't place. I am Sayara, she said. Last survivor of the research team. And you? Her silver eyes narrowed. You should not have come here. We received a distress signal, Elias replied, taking a cautious step forward. What happened to the crew? A shadow of grief passed over her alien features. Gone. All gone. It took them, one by one. What took them? Amara demanded, scanner still showing only their team's biosignatures, as if Sayara didn't register as living at all. Sayara's gaze darted to the darkened corners of the lab. It is still here. Watching. Waiting. She moved toward Elias with a fluid grace that seemed almost predatory. You must leave. Now. While you still can. We're not leaving without answers, Elias stated firmly, though something primal within him responded to her proximity with a rush of heat he couldn't explain. Then you will die, she whispered, close enough now that he could see the faint patterns etched into her blue skin, like constellations mapping unknown stars. Just as they did. Their eyes locked, and Elias felt something pass between them, a current of awareness, of recognition. Protocol dictated that he should consider her a potential threat, quarantine her, question her under controlled conditions. But as her silver gaze held his, he found himself wanting to trust her, to protect her. "Captain," Jace warned, "we should secure the unknown entity N." "Her name is Sayara," Elias interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. "And she's coming with us." A crash from the darkened hallway made them all turn. Something massive moved in the shadows beyond the lab, something that breathed with a wet, hungry sound. "Too late," Sayara whispered. "It knows you're here now." As the emergency lights flickered ominously, casting the lab into momentary darkness, Elias made a decision that would change everything. He extended his hand to the alien woman. "Then we face it together." After a heartbeat of hesitation, Sayara's cool fingers wrapped around his. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the forbidden attraction already taking root in his heart. "She's not human, Captain. We can't trust her." Lieutenant Kimura's words hung in the cramped confines of the ship's med bay. 3 days since their hasty retreat from Outpost Helios, and suspicion had taken root among the crew like a disease. Elias watched through the observation window as Dr. Nadia Volkov conducted her examination of Sayara, the alien woman's midnight blue skin stark against the sterile white of the medical table. "2 crew members dead, sir," Kimura continued, his voice taut with barely restrained anger. "Peters and Ramirez gone, just like the station's original crew. Vanished without a trace." "We don't know she's responsible," Elias countered, though doubt gnawed at his conviction. "The hell we don't. The death started after we brought her aboard." Elias couldn't deny the timing, but something deeper than logic made him resist the obvious conclusion. Every time he looked at Sayara, he felt that same inexplicable pull, a connection that defied rational explanation. "Dr. Volkov's findings?" he asked, changing the subject. "Inconclusive," Kimura replied bitterly. "Her biology is like nothing in our database. Her neurology shows patterns consistent with advanced telepathic capabilities." Elias's jaw tightened. "Telepathic? Mind reading, Captain. Maybe mind control." The implications hung between them, unspoken but damning. If Sayara could influence minds, could she be manipulating him? Was this strange attraction nothing more than alien coercion? Inside the med bay, Sayara turned her head, silver eyes finding his through the glass with unsettling precision. A shiver ran down his spine, recognition, desire, and now, fear. "Quarantine her," Elias ordered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Full isolation protocols until we reach Arcturus Station." "And if we have more disappearances before then?" Elias met his lieutenant's gaze unflinchingly. "Then I'll do what's necessary." Later, alone in his quarters, Elias reviewed security footage from the night Peters vanished. The recording showed nothing unusual, just empty corridors and the steady blink of status lights. Yet Peters had simply disappeared, leaving behind only a smear of what might have been blood on a bulkhead. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Dar." Volkov stood in his doorway, her expression grim. "She's asking for you," Nadia said. "She won't speak to anyone else." "Did your tests reveal anything?" "Only that she's dying," Nadia replied bluntly. "Her cellular structure is degrading rapidly. Whatever she is, she needs to remain in proximity to others of her kind, or..." The implication was clear. By bringing Sayara aboard, they'd effectively sentenced her to death. Against his better judgment, Elias found himself outside the quarantine chamber minutes later. Sayara sat cross-legged on the floor, her skin noticeably duller than before. "You fear me now," she said without preamble, her melodic voice weaker than he remembered. "Should I?" he asked, remaining by the door. "Yes." A sad smile curved her lips. "But not for the reasons you think. 2 of my crew are dead. Not dead. Taken. As the others were." Her silver eyes dimmed momentarily. It followed us from the station, Elias. It follows me always. What is it? A mistake. An experiment gone wrong. She rose with fluid grace despite her weakened state. My people can join minds, share thoughts, emotions, intimacies beyond physical touch. The researchers wanted to harness this ability. They created something that feeds on connection, on emotion, particularly fear. Elias studied her through the transparent barrier. Why should I believe you? Sayara placed her palm against the barrier, the pattern of constellations on her skin pulsing faintly. Because you already do. Against all reason, he raised his hand to mirror hers, separated only by the thin barrier. The moment their hands aligned, a jolt of electricity seemed to arc between them. Images flooded his mind, memories not his own, emotions foreign yet intimately familiar. When the connection broke, he was trembling, and certainty had replaced doubt. It's coming for you next, she whispered. And I cannot stop it alone. The ship's alarms shrieked as emergency lights bathed the corridors in pulsing red. Elias ran, heart hammering in his chest, the ship's layout disorienting in the chaos. Another crew member gone, Volkov this time, vanished from the med bay without a trace. Emergency protocols initiated, the ship's AI announced with mechanical calm. All personnel to designated safe zones. But Elias knew there were no safe zones, not anymore. The entity stalked them through the darkness between stars, harvesting them one by one. He reached Sayara's quarantine chamber to find the door hanging open, security systems overridden. Empty. Panic surged through him, not for his crew this time, but for her. Sayara. His voice echoed through the abandoned medical wing. Here. Her voice came from behind him, soft yet unmistakable. He turned to find her standing in the shadows, her midnight blue skin luminous in the emergency lighting. She swayed slightly, weakened by her isolation, but there was determination in those silver eyes. The containment systems failed when the power fluctuated, she explained, moving toward him with that fluid grace that sent his heart racing. Something interfered with the ship's systems. The entity? Yes. It's growing stronger with each person it takes. Her cool fingers touched his forearm, sending electricity racing up his spine. It's isolating us. Hunting us. A distant crash followed by silence confirmed her words. The ship felt suddenly vast and empty, the remaining crew scattered and vulnerable. How many left? She asked. 7, including us. Elias hesitated. Kimura organized a security team in the cargo bay. Then we must reach them before. The lights failed completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Elias felt Sayara's hand find his, her touch anchoring him in the void. This way, she whispered, guiding him through corridors she shouldn't have known. They moved in silence, the only sounds their breathing and the occasional distant groan of the ship's hull. When emergency backups finally engaged, they found themselves in an abandoned crew quarter, far from their destination. We're going the wrong way, Elias protested. No. Sayara sealed the door behind them. We can't reach them now. The entity is between us and the cargo bay. Then we have to find another route. There is no other route, Elias. Her silver eyes held a mixture of sadness and resolve. We are alone. The word hung between them, charged with meanings beyond their isolation. Alone together, cut off from help, from judgment, from restraint. You're still dying, he said softly, noticing the dullness creeping across her once vibrant skin. Yes. Her lips curved in a faint smile. My kind cannot survive long in isolation. We need connection, mental, emotional, physical. Elias stepped closer, drawn by something beyond reason or duty. The telepathic bond you showed me before. A mere shadow of true connection. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she closed the distance between them. I could show you more. If you wish it. Protocol, duty, and caution screamed warnings in his mind, but they seemed distant, irrelevant in the face of this moment, this woman. She was alien, dangerous perhaps, but the pull between them transcended species, transcended fear. Show me, he whispered. Her hands framed his face, cool against his flushed skin. When her lips met his, the world fell away. The connection that had sparked between them since their first meeting ignited into something profound and overwhelming. It was more than physical, though that aspect alone would have brought him to his knees. Her mind opened to his, memories and emotions flowing between them like water. He saw her world, a planet of azure oceans and emerald skies, felt her pain as researchers experimented on her people, understood the terrible mistake that had created the entity now hunting them. Their bodies moved together with desperate urgency, clothing discarded, inhibitions abandoned. Her skin against his glowed with faint patterns of light, the constellations on her body brightening with each caress. When they finally joined, the mental connection deepened until he couldn't tell where he ended and she began. This is what they wanted to weaponize, she whispered against his neck as they moved together. This connection. They didn't understand its sacred nature. In that moment of shared vulnerability, something shifted in the air around them, a coldness, a sense of watchful malice. It feels us, Sayara gasped, her silver eyes wide with sudden fear. Our connection, it's drawn to it. But neither could bear to break away, their bodies and minds locked in a union that transcended the danger. As they reached the height of pleasure together, the lights flickered violently, and somewhere in the darkness beyond their sanctuary, something ancient and hungry began to move. Their momentary paradise had become a beacon for the predator. And now, it was coming for them both. They ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship, hand in hand, the distant sounds of chaos nipping at their heels. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose. Faster, Sayara urged, her midnight blue skin now vibrant again after their intimate connection. The constellation patterns across her body pulsed with a steady rhythm that matched Elias's heartbeat. The cargo bay is just ahead, Elias said, his weapon drawn. If anyone's still alive. The words died in his throat as they rounded the corner. The cargo bay doors stood open, revealing a scene of devastation. Equipment lay scattered and broken, as if a hurricane had torn through. And blood, there was blood, but no bodies. Kimura, Elias whispered, spotting his lieutenant's sidearm abandoned on the floor. They were here. They still are, Sayara said, her silver eyes wide with dread. Just not as themselves anymore. A wet, slithering sound came from the shadows behind a stack of cargo containers. Something moved there, something that breathed with the collective lungs of those it had consumed. Elias raised his weapon, but Sayara placed a restraining hand on his arm. Weapons won't help, she whispered. It exists partly in another dimension. Physical damage is temporary at best. Then what do we do? His voice remained steady despite the fear coursing through him. We need to reach the engine core. Her eyes held a determined gleam. I have an idea, but it's dangerous, for both of us. Before he could respond, a shape lunged from the darkness. It was vaguely humanoid but twisted, as if multiple bodies had been fused together in a cruel approximation of life. Faces pushed against its semi-transparent skin from within, faces Elias recognized with horror as his missing crew members. Run! Sayara cried. They fled down adjacent corridors, the thing's howls echoing behind them. Each sound carried the distinct voices of the taken, a macabre chorus of the consumed. What is it? Elias gasped as they paused to catch their breath in a maintenance shaft. A psychic parasite, Sayara explained, her voice tight with fear and exertion. The researchers tried to amplify my people's telepathic abilities, to weaponize our connection. They created that thing instead, a consciousness without a body, hungry for the emotions and experiences of others. And it followed you from the station? It's drawn to me, to my kind. Our natural telepathy is like a beacon. Shame clouded her features. I should have told you sooner. I thought I could protect you. Elias touched her face, marveling at how quickly such a gesture had become essential to him. You're not responsible for what they created. A crash from nearby cut short their moment of connection. The entity was tracking them, drawn inexorably to their bond. They moved swiftly through the ship's maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main corridors where the creature hunted. Elias tried not to think about how few of his crew might remain alive, or how slim their own chances were. The engine core, Sayara said as they reached the sealed doors of engineering. The radiation there, it disrupts psychic energy. It might weaken the entity enough for us to... To what? Her silver eyes met his, filled with resolve and sadness. To trap it. Within me. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. No. There has to be another way. There isn't. Her cool fingers intertwined with his. My people's minds are structured differently than yours. I can contain it, for a time. Long enough for you to jettison my body into space. I won't sacrifice you, Elias said fiercely, the very thought of losing her now unendurable. You must. The door behind them buckled inward as something massive slammed against it. The metal groaned in protest, beginning to tear at the seams. It's here, Sayara whispered. With desperate haste, Elias override the engine room security, pulling her inside as the door behind them gave way. The entity surged into the gap, a shifting mass of semi-transparent flesh and trapped faces. The radiation of the engine core filled the chamber with a blue glow that seemed to pain the creature. It writhed at the threshold, reluctant to enter yet unwilling to abandon its prey. The containment field, Sayara gasped, pointing to a control panel. If you can activate it while I draw the entity to me. Elias moved to the console, fingers dancing across the controls. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. Then what? We use our connection. His eyes met hers with fierce determination. You showed me your mind. Now show me how to fight with it. Understanding bloomed on her face, followed by fear. It's too dangerous for you. Your mind isn't evolved for this kind of battle. Neither is that thing's, Elias countered. You said it was an accident, a fusion of human and alien consciousness gone wrong. It's vulnerable. The entity gathered itself, pushing through the pain of the radiation to enter the engine room fully. It moved with terrible purpose toward Sayara, drawn to her telepathic energy like a moth to flame. Time had run out. Choices had narrowed to a single path. Together, Sayara whispered, taking his hands in hers. The patterns on her skin flared with brilliant light as she opened her mind fully to his. Their consciousness merged in a rush of sensation and memory. Through their bond, Elias felt the ancient knowledge of her people, the art of psychic defense, the weaving of mental shields. As the entity reached for them with hungry pseudopods, they stood united in body and mind. Together, they projected a single thought with the force of two souls behind it. You cannot have us. The creature recoiled as if struck, but then surged forward with renewed hunger. It was weakened by the radiation, but still deadly, still ravenous for the unique energy of their bond. The containment field, Sayara gasped aloud, her mental voice echoing in Elias's mind. Now. With their hands still joined, Elias slammed his palm onto the activation panel. Blue energy crackled to life around the three of them, predator and prey trapped together in a prison of light. The final battle would not be fought with weapons or strength, but with will and connection. And in that moment, as the entity descended upon them, Elias knew with perfect certainty that their forbidden bond was the only thing that could save them now. Time stretched and compressed inside the containment field. The entity circled them, its form fluctuating between solid and vapor, faces of the consumed crew appearing and disappearing within its translucent body like ghosts trapped in amber. Elias and Sayara stood at the center, their hands intertwined, minds still connected in the intimate bond they had forged. The engine core's radiation bathed them in ethereal blue light, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with lives of their own. "It's weakening," Sayara whispered, both aloud and within their shared consciousness. "But it's also desperate. More dangerous." Elias could feel the creature's hunger radiating toward them in waves, a psychic assault that made his temples throb with pain. Without Sayara anchoring him, he would have been overwhelmed instantly. "What's the plan?" he asked through gritted teeth, fighting to maintain his mental defenses as she had taught him. "We need to fragment it." Her silver eyes glowed with fierce determination. "Separate the consumed consciousnesses from the parasite core. If we can free even a few, the entity will destabilize." The entity sensed their intent. It surged forward, slamming against their shared mental shield with such force that Sayara cried out, her midnight blue skin momentarily losing its luster. "Focus on me," she gasped, squeezing his hands tighter. "On us. Our connection is stronger than its hunger." Elias closed his eyes, concentrating on the bond between them, that impossible, forbidden attraction that had deepened into something transcendent. He thought of her touch, her memories now intertwined with his, the universe of understanding they had built together. Their shared mental shield strengthened, pushing the entity back. It howled with the voices of the consumed, a cacophony of pain and rage. "Now," Sayara commanded. "Reach for them. Reach for your crew." Through their connection, Elias extended his consciousness toward the trapped minds within the entity. He focused first on Kimura, picturing his lieutenant's face, his voice, his unwavering loyalty. "Kimura," he called, both mentally and aloud. "Fight it. Come back to us." Within the writhing mass of the entity, something stirred, a face pushing against its prison with renewed vigor, eyes clearing with recognition. "Captain?" The voice was faint, confused, but unmistakably Kimura's. "That's it," Sayara encouraged. "Call to them. Remind them who they are." One by one, Elias reached for his crew, Volkov, Ramirez, Peters, the others. Some responded immediately, their consciousness rising to meet his call. Others remained submerged, too far gone to hear him. The entity thrashed in agony as minds began to tear free from its grasp. Its form distorted, stretching thin in places as it fought to maintain control of its feast. "It's working," Elias breathed. Then, with sudden ferocity, the entity changed tactics. Instead of attacking their shield, it plunged directly through it, aiming not for Elias but for Sayara. "No!" Elias pulled her behind him, but the entity was faster, wrapping tendrils of its essence around her throat. Sayara's eyes widened in pain and shock as the creature began to force its way into her, seeking to consume the very source of the telepathic energy it craved. Elias felt their connection beginning to tear. Without conscious thought, he threw himself forward, wrapping his arms around Sayara's convulsing form. He poured everything he had into their bond, not just his strength or his will, but his heart, his soul, the love that had grown between them against all odds and reason. "You can't have her," he growled at the entity. "You can't have us." The radiation from the engine core intensified, responding to the massive energy discharge of their psychic battle. Blue light became blinding white, and the very air inside the containment field seemed to crystallize with power. In that moment of ultimate connection, Elias and Sayara's minds became truly one, human and alien united in perfect symmetry. Their combined consciousness expanded outward in a shockwave of pure psychic energy, tearing through the entity's defenses. The parasite screamed, its form fragmenting as freed consciousnesses burst from its disintegrating body. Kimura materialized first, his physical form reconstructing from the energy patterns of his mind. Then Volkov, then others, some of Elias's crew, some from the original station team. The entity fought back with the desperation of a dying thing, concentrating its remaining strength on maintaining its hold on Sayara. Dark tendrils burrowed deeper into her mind, seeking to replace what it was losing. Elias, she gasped, her voice fading as her silver eyes began to dim. Let me go. Save yourself. Never. He held her tighter, feeling her slipping away despite his efforts. I'm not losing you. Not now. Not after everything. With one final surge of will, Elias did the unthinkable. He opened himself completely, offering his own consciousness as a conduit. The entity, sensing fresh prey, hesitated in its assault on Sayara. That moment of indecision was all they needed. Together, Sayara whispered, rallying her remaining strength. As one being, they pushed back against the parasite, forcing it out of Sayara's mind and into the space between them. Caught in the crucible of their connection and the engine core's radiation, the entity could no longer maintain its cohesion. With a silent explosion of light and energy, the parasite shattered, its essence dispersing into harmless particles that glittered briefly in the air before fading to nothing. The containment field collapsed. Elias caught Sayara as she crumpled, her skin faded to a dull gray-blue, the constellation patterns nearly invisible. Stay with me, he pleaded, cradling her against his chest as the freed crew members gathered around them in confusion. Sayara, please. Her silver eyes flickered open, meeting his with faint recognition. We did it. Yes, we did. Now stay with me. That's an order. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I never was very good at following orders. Her eyes closed, and for one terrible moment, Elias thought he'd lost her. Then he felt it, a faint stirring in the bond they still shared. Not gone, just retreated deep within herself to heal. Captain? Kimura's voice penetrated his grief. What happened? How did we? Where are we? Elias looked up at his bewildered crew, at the faces of strangers who must be survivors from the research station, at the aftermath of their impossible victory. It's over, he said simply. We're safe now. In his arms, Sayara stirred faintly, her hand seeking his. When their fingers intertwined, a spark of her familiar energy passed between them, weak, but present. Alive. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, suspicions, perhaps even charges for his unorthodox decisions. The military would want to understand what had happened. Scientists would want to study Sayara, if they didn't fear her outright. But in this moment, none of that mattered. They had faced death together and emerged victorious. Their connection, forbidden, inexplicable, powerful, had saved not just themselves but everyone the entity had consumed. As the ship's systems gradually returned to normal and the survivors began to take stock of their situation, Elias held Sayara close, feeling the slow strengthening of her life force through their bond. Where will we go? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Wherever we need to, he replied, his decision already made. Captain, soldier, dutiful officer, those identities seemed distant now, less real than the man who had found something precious in the darkness of space. She was not human. Convention, duty, even biology stood between them. Yet as Sayara's silver eyes met his with newfound hope, Elias knew with absolute certainty that he would brave any obstacle to keep what they had found together. Because in the cold emptiness between stars, they had discovered the rarest thing of all, a connection that transcended the boundaries of worlds, of species, of what should have been possible. And he would never let it go.